Okay, so in the last video we talked about what the RBA do every single day to try and influence the cash rate. But every now and then they actually change their target cash rate. So, and on the Tuesday of the first of every month, the RBA get together and determine whether they want to set a lower or higher cash rate or keep the cash rate exactly the same. What we're going to talk about in this video is basically what the RBA have to do if they want to lower the cash rate, which we call a loosening of monetary policy, or they want to increase the target cash rate and implement a tighter monetary policy stance. So there's three stances basically. There's a tighter stance, which basically means the cash rate is raised to slow down economic activity and reduce inflation. There is a loosening of monetary policy, which basically means that they will lower the cash rate to try and stimulate economic activity, and if they're trying to increase employment or growth. And then we have what we call a neutral stance, where there's actually no change in the cash rate at all. So the target cash rate is basically the rate that they want to charge to ensure that it's consistent with their monetary policy settings. So if they're trying to promote growth and promote employment, they will generally set a lower cash rate to try and stimulate consumption spending, to try and stimulate investment. Once they set the target cash rate, they actually have to influence and change. They actually have to buy and sell securities in order to make sure that the actual cash rate that the banks charge each other is the same as their target cash rate. So there's a difference between the target cash rate that the banks aim for the cash rate to be at and what the actual cash rate that the banks charge each other is, and that's based on the amount of liquidity that the banks have or the amount that they have in their exchange settlement accounts. So they will set the target cash rate, then they operate in the market to ensure the actual cash rate is as close as possible to the target cash rate. So here we go. For example, if the RBA want to implement an expansionary stance and loosen monetary policy, which is a fancy word for saying they want to lower the cash rate, which will flow onto other interest rates and promote growth through the channels we've talked about. So firstly, the RBA will announce that they are aiming to lower the target cash rate. First of all, they go out and announce they're going to lower the target cash rate. The second thing they will do is they will stop paying the banks as much money, or they will decrease the rate that they charge on the exchange settlement account. So when the banks have to borrow from the RBA as a last resort, they will lower the rate that they're charging them on at. And they will also reduce the rate that they pay banks for surpluses in their exchange settlement accounts. Then they will, the RBA will, next thing that they will do is they will buy securities at an attractive price. So because they want to implement an expansionary stance, they need the banks to have more liquidity. So they announce the target cash rate, they decrease the rates that they charge banks if they're going to lend to them, and then they buy securities off the banks to increase the amount of liquidity the banks have in their exchange settlement accounts. So the banks and non-banks financial institutions receive cash from the RBA and get rid of some of their securities, and now they have excess liquidity. They have a surplus or a high supply of cash in these exchange settlement accounts. And because they have so much cash in these exchange settlement accounts, this puts downward pressure on the cash rate. The banks are more liquid and therefore more willing to lend at a lower cash rate. And eventually what happens, because of competitive pressures, which we'll talk about in the next video, these lower rates flow through to other commercial interest rates in the economy. So they flow through in terms of lower interest rates on mortgages, lower car loans, lower other short-term loans will decrease. So an expansionary stance. First thing, announce a lower target cash rate. Then they will decrease the rate paid on them, or paid on exchange settlement accounts, or received for banks that have surpluses on their exchange settlement accounts. They will buy securities at an attractive yield. This will make the banks more liquid and put downward pressure on the cash rate, which will eventually flow through to other rates throughout the economy. If, in simpler terms, RBA buys securities, gives banks cash, banks now have lots of cash in their exchange settlement accounts, they want to lend, so they offer a lower cash rate, and then other interest rates go down as well. Implementing a contractionary stance, first thing, the RBA announced they intend to raise interest rates, and they announced an increase in the target cash rate. Then they increase the rate financial institutions are paid on surplus accounts or charged if they have a deficit. Third step, the RBA sells government securities to financial institutions because they want to make the banks less liquid. Now obviously the banks aren't just going to accept to buy these securities unless they're cheap, so they offer these securities at a discounted price, so banks will make a profit out of it, but they will still have less cash in the short term because they're holding more of a non-liquid asset. This creates a shortage of cash in the short-term money market, and there's less money to lend out to each other. Then, so financial institutions have to limit the amount they lend and increase their cash rate that they're willing to lend. So it's basically like saying these banks now have less money or less cash available to lend to other banks, therefore they're more stingy, they raise their rates, and that rate then flows onto other interest rates throughout the economy. But it does depend on the amount of competition for loans. If there's high competition for mortgages or something like that, they may not pass on the full increase in the interest rates because they want to still attract people to lend from them. To borrow from them. But generally, most of the increase in the cash rate will be passed on. So they announced to increase interest rates. They increase the rate financial institutions are paid on their exchange settlement account surpluses or charged on their deficits. Then they sell government securities, which creates a shortage of cash. In simpler terms, RBA sell government securities, banks buy securities in exchange for cash. This gives the banks less money, shortage of cash in markets, we increase interest rates, all other interest rates flow on from that. That's all.